Dave continues to be he's a passionate advocate for Agile, helping teams and workplaces thrive. And, we loved having him with us before, and we're excited to learn from him again today. So let's give Dave another warm welcome. Thanks, Dave. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the kind intro, Jamie. Great to be back again. I think this is my third time with you guys, so
Yeah.
great to complete it and great to do three different things. It's great to try new things out. So let me bring this up and let's get started. I hope that's coming through. If not, please shout. Looks good. Okay, great. So this talk is called The Four Endings of a Retrospective. And if you've seen anything I've been sharing about this, you'll know it's a combination of some cinema theory. So if you like cinema, there'll be something in here for you on the cinema front. But then taking that cinema theory and applying it in the Agile and Scrum delivery framework. So I'm hoping this can be a little bit of colliding of worlds that you may find interesting, you may find slightly entertaining. But importantly, I hope it's something actionable and something that you can take away and use. But let me go through it in a little bit more detail. So we'll start by doing a little bit of signposting. I'll start by doing some scene setting. I'll dig into that cinematic theory section just to bottom that out, get you guys up to speed. And then what we'll do is look at how that links into Agile delivery, Scrum delivery, and retrospectives. And then I'll give you some key takeaways. As I say, I hope this is going to be something actionable that you can take away and use. And I've got a boatload of other stuff that's available for free, templates, plans, all sorts of other stuff that I'm hoping you'll like and use. But if you think it's rubbish, by all means, give it a miss. So before we get started, there's a bit of a spoiler warning in this. I'm going to touch on a hell of a lot of films as we go. These are quite classic films now, so I don't think there's anything that's the latest and greatest. But if there's anything in here that you want to watch that you haven't watched yet, be aware it's going to be spoiled at some point in this talk, so you may need to close your ears at certain points. But I would hope anyone who wants to see these has seen them by now. And the other thing, this is quite a new talk for me. So at the end of the talk, there's going to be a QR code. I would love to get some feedback on this, especially if you think it's, well, if you think it's good, if you think it's rubbish, and especially if you think it's actionable or something that you'd take away and apply. That's really what I'm trying to drive at with this. Okay, so the first question I normally ask in this, but I think it's one we've all already answered, is what are your favorite movies and films? A lot of you guys have covered that in the chat earlier on, but just try and hold on to that as we go. And if you've got a pen and paper, it might be worth making a couple of notes as we go. But the first question I'll often ask is, what is your favorite film or your favorite movie? And what that leads me to is one thing that every great movie has, and every great movie has a great protagonist. When I say protagonist, what I mean is the leading character in a story who typically exemplifies a particular cause or an idea, and it's one of the major characters in a play, film, or novel. So the next question would be, or apologies, before we go to the next question, some popular examples. These are all protagonists that I'm sure you've seen at some point in your movie watching endeavors and careers: Homer Simpson, Indiana Jones, Jack Sparrow, Moana, Dorothy, Shrek, Remy, and Flick. So these are all some examples of popular protagonists from popular movies and series. Can you identify the protagonist in your story? I would encourage you to have sort of your story on one line, your movie on one line, then underneath that chief protagonist. Typically, your protagonist needs two things in a movie to drive the story forward and drive them through their arc, and these are wants and needs. The wants are external goals to the character. They're known to the character, and they're typically unique to them. These are used to drive the plot forward. Needs, on the other hand, are a little bit antithetical to this. Needs are internal goals. They're not necessarily known to the character. They're often opaque and they're often hidden. These are universal to us all, and these are really helpful for driving the character through their arc and moving the plot forward with the wants. This is all a little bit abstract and theoretical for now, I understand, so let me bring out a quick example. Does anyone know who this guy is? I'm hoping this is one that a lot of you guys have seen. I've got his name there, but his character is Joker. So in the recent Joker film, the protagonist is Arthur Fleck. And if we have a look at his wants and needs at a fairly high level, what Arthur wants is to become a famous stand-up comedian, and he wants to make people happy, make people laugh. And that's what that's sort of the driver for him in the film. That's what he wants to achieve. That's what he wants to obtain. This is very unique to Arthur. Not everyone wants to become a stand-up comedian. He clearly knows he wants to do this, and this is what's driving him forward. His needs, on the other hand, are a bit antithetical to this. What he needs to do is address his mental health challenges and previous traumas. You might remember in the film he suffers from a little bit of a checkered past, a really traumatic childhood, and never really gets around to addressing the root cause of this. These needs are hidden to Arthur. He doesn't quite grapple with them in a conscious way, and these are universal to us all. This is something that we all need to do at some point or periodically throughout our lives. I hope that's a helpful sort of illustration of what I mean by wants and needs and the differences there. But let's keep stepping forward. We get to the 4 endings of any story by creating a 2x2 matrix like this and cross-referencing the wants and needs of your protagonist. So if we have a story or a film where the wants and the needs both go unmet, we'll get a bitter ending. If we go through a story where we get what we want and not necessarily what we need, we'll get a bittersweet ending. If we go the opposite way, we get what we need but not necessarily what we want, we get a semi-sweet ending. And if we get both, we get a sweet ending. So those are the 4 ending types that we're going to be driving at, and the 4 that we'll talk about through the sort of lifespan of this talk. I'll just walk through some examples now, and I'm hoping there's going to be some characters in here that you recognize. So please jump in the chat or come off mute if you recognize any of these guys. But we'll start with bitter endings. Does anyone recognize who these 2 are? There's one that everyone should get, just to put some pressure on. I'm just bringing up the chat. So we've got Leonardo, that's the actor. Michael Corleone, bingo, on the left. Who's Leonardo playing on the right? Okay, I'll bring this up. So we've got Michael Corleone on the left, and on the right, we've got Jay Gatsby from The Great Gatsby. These 2 are bitter endings. For anyone who's seen these films, what Michael Corleone wants is to distance himself from his family's criminal activities and lead a normal life. What he needs to do is find a sense of peace and true family connection. In the end, he gets neither of these, and it becomes a bit of a tragedy, his story. And it's similar for Jay Gatsby. He wants to rekindle his romance with Daisy and reclaim his past glories. But what he needs to do is accept reality, let go of that idealized past, and find some more genuine, meaningful connections in the moment. Again, anyone who's seen The Great Gatsby, you'll probably remember he ends up getting neither of these. And this might sound a little bit sadomasochistic, but in some ways, I think that these bitter endings are the best stories. And in some ways, as we go through this framework that I've sort of whittled out of this, I think the bitter endings are probably the best material for Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, and delivery professionals to work with. But we'll get into that in slightly more detail as we go. This time we'll talk about some bittersweet endings. So 2 more characters. Does anyone recognize these 2? Again, there's one everyone should get and one that might not.
Frodo.
Frodo, bingo.
Not sure on the
Does
right.
anyone recognize this lady on the right? It's quite an old one now. I'm sort of dating myself. Clarice Starling, very good search. So we've got Frodo and Clarice Starling who have a bittersweet ending where they get what we get what we want, but not necessarily what we needed. So Frodo Baggins wants to destroy the ring. Tick in the box, he manages to do that. What he needed to do was find himself in some inner peace after his long journey. Wasn't able to do that and had to leave with Gandalf and a few other characters to find that peace. Clarice Starling wanted to prove herself as an FBI agent by catching Buffalo Bill, which again, tick in the box, she did. What she needed to do was confront and resolve some past traumas and insecurities, particularly around her father's death. And anyone who's seen Hannibal, you'll probably remember that although she called Buffalo Bill, these things still haunted her at the end of the story. Okay, let's move away from these sort of negative connotations and move to something slightly more positive. So, semi-sweet endings. This time we get what we need, but not necessarily what we wanted. So, when we're thinking semi-sweet, these are 2 characters. The one on the right, everyone should get. The one on the left, you'll be a real cinema buff if you know who this is. I'm very interested if anyone can get who's on the left. No one's got him yet.
It's Rick.
Rick who?
Rick, the cafe owner.
think Rick Blaine from Casablanca. Congratulations. There's actually more people got this than I thought there would. So great. So semi-sweet endings. We've got Rick Blaine from Casablanca, who wanted to be with Isla and rekindle his romance, but he gave that up in order to help her get away. He learned to do the right thing and helped Isla and her husband escape. So got what he needed for his character development, but not necessarily what he objectively wanted. Similar for Tony Stark, he wanted to defeat Thanos, save the universe, and go back to a normal life. Sort of managed that, but the need was to find peace with his past, reconcile a sense of responsibility, and secure a future for his family. Big tick in the box there. So while he couldn't go back to a normal life, it was a sort of a self-sacrifice arc. He was able to get what he needed, which is what leads to this semi-sweet and slightly more positive than the other two. The final category, as I'm sure you all know by now, is a sweet ending. I'm sure everyone knows who these two guys are, but I'll give it 2 seconds. Does anyone recognize the guys on the left and the right here?
Marty McFly.
Bingo. Marty McFly on the right and Luke Skywalker. Congratulations, Rob. And in some ways, although sweet endings are typically more popular movies, I don't enjoy them quite as much. I think they're a little bit more straightforward, childish, simplified. And I think the same's true when you're going to apply this framework as a Scrum, a delivery, and agile professional. So, sweet endings. Luke wants to redeem his father, embrace his destiny as a Jedi, finding his strength, bring balance to the Force. By the end of the trilogy, he gets all of those, so it's a very sweet ending. And Marty, you may remember, wanted to ensure his parents fell in love so that he would exist, and also needed to understand the value of family, responsibility, and most importantly of all, how his actions impact the future. Again, by the end of the film, he's ticked all those boxes. So that's a bit of a walkthrough of the protagonist, their wants and needs, and how we cross-reference those into the 4 endings of a retrospective. Next question. So you've answered what your favourite movie is. I hope you've been able to identify your protagonist. Now have a think. What category does your protagonist fit into? Did they get everything they wanted? Did they get one and not the other? Or did they get nothing? And then from there we can step forward. So we'll switch gears now slightly. That's a lot of cinema theory that I hope we've downloaded and absorbed. But now what we're going to do is add agile into the mix. So first step here is, instead of thinking in terms of a protagonist, unplug them and plug in your team, your Scrum team, delivery team, agile team. Your team, similar to a protagonist, will have some wants, some things they want to achieve, some things they want to do, and they'll have some needs, things that they need to do, they need to have in place to get the job done. Every retrospective that they have will fit broadly into one of these 4 categories. And everything that we're talking about here, the wants, the needs, the endings that we come to, we'll typically discuss in a retrospective style session. Before we step forward, can anyone tell me what the purpose of a retrospective is? And bonus points if you don't Google the Scrum Guide. There's 2 things we're looking for. Who's going to be brave?
Inspect and adapt.
Inspect and adapt are pillars of Scrum.
Lessons learned.
Sort of. What we're looking for are ways to improve quality and effectiveness. And this framework, I think, will give you a lot of rich context around the existing quality level, where you could capture some improvements there, and how you can improve your effectiveness across the board in terms of obtaining the wants and the needs. So, quick callback. We've got wants that are external goals. These are known to the team. The team will be very clear on what these are. They'll typically be unique to the team, so these won't be cross-cutting. These will be very specific goals to the team that are advertised outwardly, and these are useful to drive the initiative or the project or the delivery forward. Needs, on the other hand, are slightly different. These are going to be internal goals, more opaque and hidden. Teams can easily lose sight of these or maybe not be aware of them in the first place. These will be universal to us all. So most teams will need some of these needs. These will be sort of universal good practices or good habits to be in. And these are helpful to drive the team through their arc. What I mean by that is these are very helpful for sort of catalyzing team development and helping them to improve their ways of working and drive out more value. I hope already you can see, as an agile professional or a scrum master or a delivery coach, which of these two broad categories should be getting more of your attention. I would hope that you can see hidden needs for internal goals that the team might not be aware of. Especially as a scrum master, you should be looking to raise transparency on those as often as you can. And then that'll lead to more thorough inspections, which will lead to more powerful adaptations, and that becomes a bit of a virtuous cycle. So I'm hoping this is good material to start with. So quick example here. Let's imagine that we've got a delivery team that's tasked with revamping the UI of an e-commerce website. What we're looking to do is enhance UX and increase conversion rates, make some more money. Some wants, so the team will want to deliver on time. We might want good customer satisfaction surveys coming back. We might want some recognition and praise, and we want to boost those conversion rates. Those are all fairly objective. The team will be aware of those. Those will be quite unique to this particular team working on this initiative. The needs could be things like, we need improved collaboration if we want to obtain some of these wants. We may need to enhance our skills depending on the platform at hand and what we've got within the team. We may need to develop some sustainable practices to make sure that we're not going to burn out, but equally that we're delivering enough value to warrant the investment. And the bottom one, we need to be delivering value to customers. That's sort of the core mantra of Agile and Scrum ways of working. We're looking to deliver more value as efficiently and as effectively as we can. Another quick callback. So these are the 4 broad categories that we've got for endings that we can get, depending on whether the team gets both what they want and what they need. If they get neither, or if they get one or the other. These are the 4 broad categories that your sprints or your retrospectives are going to fall into. Thinking on those 4 endings, so thinking on this, what type of endings do you see more often than not? Do you see a lot of sweet endings? Do you see a lot of bitter endings? Do you see something in the middle? What do you guys typically see? Okay, I'll step forward one. So in my experience, the spread looks a little bit like this. Ah, wrong way, sorry. This is typically what I see. We get a good dose of sweet and bittersweet and semi-sweet. There's a fair serving of bitter in there, but the sweet ones are harder to come by. It's very rare we get everything right within the context of a sprint. And in some ways that's good, in some ways that's bad. The biggest problem I see typically, though, is there are far too many bitter endings for anyone's liking. What we want to do is minimize those as best we can. And then you could think, what type of endings do you want to create? What do you want to see more often than not? And for me, I would say we want to see something a little more like this in terms of the spread. We want to see more sweet endings if we can. 9 times out of 10, I would be looking for that. But I also think that effective and experienced Agile practitioners will be able to use semi-sweet and bittersweet endings judiciously to drive the team through development arcs and allow them to learn from their experience, conduct experiments that are safe to fail, where we might not get what we want and we need, we might get one or the other, but that becomes good material to keep the team driving forward and improve our ways of working. So the main question you need to think about, or the main question I'd encourage you to think about when we're looking at these 4 endings, is how did we get here? And what I wish I had here was the sound effect from the really popular sort of TikTok style videos where it's record scratch, freeze frame. Yep, that's me. And you're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. This is sort of the crux of this framework or this idea for an Agile professional. First of all, we start by understanding what our team's wants and needs are. We then categorize based on our iteration, our sprint, where we think we're landing. And then we do a bit of a root cause analysis. How did we end up at this particular ending? Why are we in a bittersweet ending instead of a sweet one? Why have we ended up at a bitter ending instead of a semi-sweet one? And there's a lot of material here that I'm going to dive through. that I hope will be able to draw some parallels between some popular movies and what that could mean in terms of your agile teams and how you can interpret these. So, bitter endings to start. In movies, typically we get the bitter endings with character flaws. Jay Gatsby's a great example of these: pride, stubbornness, naivety. And in your agile teams, this can translate to a lot of different things. So when we think of pride, we can think of agile teams being overconfident, rejecting feedback, thinking that they know better. When we think of stubbornness, we can think of things like resistance to change and resistance to adaptation. This is the way we've always done it. Why would we change now? And naivety, a lack of experience, a lack of understanding, knowledge, or skills. These are all good signposts that you're heading in a bad direction if you're seeing too many of these. In bitter endings, we can also think about external pressures. So we can think about antagonists, societal constraints, and economics. In The Great Gatsby, the nemesis for Jay Gatsby is Tom Buchanan, and he's a conflicting interest, a stakeholder who's set against you. In agile teams, you'll come into contact with these as well. When we think of societal constraints in movies that sort of inform certain dynamics, you'll have these in your organizations at large as well. You can think of organizational culture, policy changes, inertia that could set in. And economics as well, especially in The Great Gatsby, there's a really big gap between the haves at the top end of Jay Gatsby's parties and the have-nots at the bottom. You can come into similar situations like this in your organizations as well, where we've got budget cuts, restructures, recessions. These can have a clear, important effect on the effectiveness of your teams and also the value that they're able to drive out of their initiatives. The final category I want to touch on in bitter endings is situational challenges. Michael Corleone is a great example of dilemmas, wanting to do the right thing but getting dragged in service of saving his family. Three broad categories here. We can think about unknowns, dilemmas, and betrayals. Those are great devices for cinematic experiences, and I relate those to agile teams in a few different ways. So unknowns, we'll all be familiar with these. Team members go off with illness for a week, blockers come out of the woodwork, risks and assumptions materialize that were unknown unknowns. These should be very familiar to people working in delivery focus roles. Dilemmas, we can think of things like cutting corners, making trade-offs, accepting technical debt when maybe we shouldn't. And betrayals, we can think about having a lack of leadership within the team, a lack of trust and support from leadership within the wider organization. These are all things that give you a bit of an indication that we're on the wrong track here. So when we think of bitter endings, those character flaws, external pressures, situational challenges, those are good material to monitor and make sure that you haven't got too many of those coming into your purview. Otherwise, you could start to see things slipping through the net. The next category I want to talk about, bittersweet endings. So remember, in a bittersweet ending, we get what we want, but that's typically at the expense of what we needed to get. So in movies, we can think of things like unresolved inner conflicts, external wins and inner losses, and compromises that we have to make. Snape's a great example of this, sacrifices his love with Harry Potter's mother in service of protecting him. And in agile teams, I relate this in a couple of different ways. So external wins and inner losses, fair enough. We might have got the delivery done. We might look like we've got everything done on time. But we know that we've sacrificed other things that we should have done to do that. We've cut corners, we've adopted technical debt, we've shot ourselves in the foot to get this one across the line. Compromise is very similar. Your team may feel conflicted about some of the implications of what they've done or some of the decisions that they've made to succeed in delivery. And ultimately, that makes the success very hollow. Although you might be succeeding on paper or according to the metrics, there's sort of a tide floating underneath the surface that was going to drag your team down and maybe make things more difficult moving forward. Next, in bittersweet endings, we can talk about partially wins, sort of half wins, those hollow wins. And Matthew McConaughey's character in Interstellar is a good example of this. Part successes, making settling for less. When we think of part successes, we can think about delivering projects successfully, but we miss out on additional goals. We don't innovate or experiment. And opportunities for improvements within the team or within the product or within the initiative are left on the table. All we care about is getting the job done. No exploration, no room to grow. And when we think of settling for less, we will typically set out on a project with a high-level initial set of goals. We all understand that those are going to grow and change as we go, but typically there'll still be some semblance of those left at the end where we can sort of say, okay, we started out wanting to do this. We've learned some stuff along the way, but roughly we've landed somewhere near where we wanted to be. When we settle for less, we typically write some of those off so that we can create, again, one of those hollow wins. We can tick the box on paper, but underneath the surface, we know maybe not as good as it looks. Final thing in bittersweet endings, personal sacrifices. These are great cinematic devices, and these always create really compelling storylines, and you can relate these back to your teams fairly straightforwardly. We can think about trading relationships for goals. So a sacrifice you'll often see in a movie is people burn their friends in order to get what they want. In agile teams, this can happen as well, where we're achieving our project goals at the expense of things like work-life balance and relationships. We're leaning too heavily on team members to get a job done. We're placing unreasonable expectations around wider teams within the organization to help us. These are really the start of a slippery slope downhill where morale can really start to plummet. And self-sacrifice is another one. I've had this problem on a couple of teams where you get team members who are making really significant sacrifices to ensure the project success. And often they'll not even tell you about it, they'll just do it. Which is good in some ways to see that level of commitment and drive, but in others, if I don't have a real level of transparency on that to monitor and assess how things are going, I'm not getting a true level of transparency on how our team's performing. If I'm assuming that we're all working the standard 8-hour day, but meanwhile someone's putting in 12, 14 hours a day and we're still not hitting the mark, that's a really big problem that I'm going to be unaware of. So monitoring for those instances of self-sacrifice and trading relationships for goals, really important to avoid these bittersweet endings. So bittersweet endings, we've got unresolved inner conflicts, partial fulfillment of desires, those hollow wins, and personal sacrifices. Again, this is good signposting that although you might be hitting the mark in some ways, deeper analysis is required to make sure that these wins are really high quality and they really stand up to scrutiny. Let's move forward to a little bit more positive now. So let's think semi-sweet now. In semi-sweet, we get what we need, but not necessarily what we wanted in the first place. So we can think of things like growth and development, building self-understanding, growing or maturing. And Elizabeth Bennett's a great example of this. She grows and matures quite rapidly and quite profoundly through the course of her film. When we think about building self-understanding, this should be a really prime sort of concern for agile coaches, for Scrum Masters. You want to see your teams developing that self-understanding and developing their skills and experience. Teams can gain a deeper understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. This allows them to help more effective decisions, builds them towards that self-management model, and allows them to improve for future projects, even if the current project didn't necessarily go to plan. If we've learned a hell of a lot that we can then act on, that's still a win. Although we might have, on paper, missed the mark, or on paper not be able to tick all the boxes, we've got a lot of great material in there that can drive growth forward. And when we think of growing and maturing, the team can start to build a deeper appreciation for that continuous growth habit and development. This is why I'm such an advocate of retrospectives, and I really look at it as the sort of core catalyzing practice that drives continuous improvement through your teams and organizations. Okay, that's growth and development. For semi-sweet, the next one we can think about, instead of now making those negative trade-offs that we talked about last time, where we sacrifice what we need in service of what we want. For semi-sweet endings, we sort of do the opposite in some ways. We sacrifice what we thought we wanted in service of realizing what we need. And Will Hunting's a good example of this, where he realizes what truly matters, releases that initial goal that he thought he wanted for something that's a higher order ideal. And releasing ideas of perfection is also very helpful. And we can relate that back to agile teams again. In terms of realizing what truly matters, teams typically, as we're going through the lifespan of a delivery, will identify and focus on our essential needs more than we will the artificial or the superficial wants. This can be things like team well-being, core practices and beliefs, core principles that we want to cling to, over the less critical desires that may look good on paper but don't really serve the team in a meaningful way. Releasing perfection. I'm sure this is a challenge that a lot of agile teams and agilists have ran into, but teams letting go of those unattainable goals, those stretch targets that are just too much of a stretch, to focus on those achievable, meaningful improvements that we can then aggregate over time instead of constantly driving ourselves into a car crash. That really helps us to get what we need at the expense of what we want. And the final thing here, unexpected outcomes. Great cinematic device, and Groove from Despicable Me is a great example of this. We'll find joy or happiness in unexpected places, and we discover a deeper sense of purpose. This is really easy to relate to Agile teams again. When we think about finding joy or happiness, we can have teams who find an unexpected level of benefit or joy in their work. They're able to fulfill some essential needs. They might discover a creative outlet within the project. They might discover a deep sense of mission, depending on what we're working on. Even if the initial project desires go unmet, there's other alternatives that we can bring in. And this should be very familiar to Agilists again. We start out with a sort of vague vision of where we want to go, and we learn halfway through that maybe this isn't the way we should go and let's change gears. Similar on discovering purpose. The team rediscovers or discovers purpose, finds new meaning in the work, achieves a deeper level of fulfillment, more able to commit in a more meaningful and a more positive way to getting the job done. So, semi-sweet outcomes, things like growth and development, putting our needs over our wants, those unexpected outcomes. These are signposts that you sort of switching gears from those negative outcomes. You're heading towards something more positive, but you're not quite all the way there yet. And the final category is where we're going to talk about that. In sweet endings, we get what we want as well as what we need. So this should be the holy grail of what we're driving towards in a retrospective session. The first character, one of my favorites, is Rocky Marciano. And he's got a couple of key things that really help him to create some sweet endings and get what he wants and he needs. He's got a very clear vision and purpose, and he's also very persistent and unbelievably resilient. We can relate these characteristics back to our Agile teams fairly straightforwardly. In vision and purpose, we can think of things like setting clear, achievable goals for work and retrospective sessions, ensuring everyone understands and is aligned with these goals, raising transparency, having effective inspections, and then powerful adaptations. This should be a really familiar pattern to most of you guys. And persistence and resilience. These are sort of really nice characteristics and attributes that we'd like to build and develop within our teams. The teams remain determined and resilient to overcoming obstacles and setbacks through continuous effort and adaptation. And the real holy grail of this one in terms of persistence or resilience is when you can see your teams doing this without your input. If they're able to do this in a self-managing way where you don't need to be on hand to drive that through, you're really onto a good thing. Next one, strong support systems. Simba is a great example of this. Tons of allies and mentors and lots of collaboration throughout the lifespan of the Lion King. All the images on the left here, these are key allies, mentors, and guides for Simba, and he's able to leverage those really effectively. Your Agile team should be looking to do the same, build their networks within the internal organization and externally, and look to leverage those relationships to provide support, guidance, assistance, and even a little bit of encouragement when you need it. And collaboration, again, really core practice for all Agilists and all Agile teams. Teams collaborate effectively, leveraging the strengths and contributions of all of their members to achieve common goals. The thing I like to bring up when we talk about collaboration and sort of leveraging strengths, this doesn't mean everyone doing every job. This doesn't mean everyone doing the same thing. This is more about the teams having a deeper appreciation for the unique skill sets that they have across the board and being able to adapt to the situation at hand with those available skill sets. So I wouldn't always expect anyone on the team to be able to set up an automation testing framework, for example. If a need arises for that, we'll have skills within the team who will then come to the fore to do that. And that can apply across a variety of different examples, situations, and contexts. So I hope this is fairly familiar for us as Agilists and Scrum people. Final one in sweet endings is a balanced approach to challenges. So we're able to balance up our immediate and our longer term goals. We can find more of a balance between those needs and wants. And we can evangelize principles like pragmatism and flexibility. We're not going to force down dogmatic ideas. We're not going to cling to principles when they're no longer serving us. Hermione Granger is a great example of this. Really able to take a pragmatic approach to problem solving, very flexible and always looking to expand our skills and capability. We can relate this back to Agile teams again. We can have teams who balance the demands of immediate project goals with the need for long-term improvements in team health. We're not going to make those trade-offs anymore. We're not going to explicitly sacrifice one for the other. We'll create a more pragmatic view where we can do what we can to the best of our ability in both. And this is great for you as an Agile professional. If the team are trying their best and giving you a really good read on what they can achieve in terms of their wants and their needs at the same time, you've now got a really clear and high level of transparency around what the capability looks like within that team and what they can now confidently commit to moving forward. And pragmatism and flexibility, the team remains pragmatic and flexible, adjusting strategies as needed to address challenges effectively. it's very easy to fall in love or put your faith in things like frameworks or methodologies or approaches. Ultimately, the key test of them is going to be when you apply them. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to apply it. Some of it's going to work and some of it won't. The key thing is that the teams that are going to end up with these sweet endings, they're going to remain alive to what works and keep that. And they're going to remain alive to what doesn't work and discard that and continue to roll things through until we find a balance that continually serves us. Okay. So that's a lot of detail and a lot of examples from films that I've gone through. What this will give you, or what the hope this gives you, is sort of a nice little internal map of signposts that you can monitor as a Scrum Master. So you can be looking out for character flaws, you can be looking out for internal conflicts, you can be looking out for growth and development, you can be looking out for clear goals and vision. And this gives you a lot of good signposts and to understand in the course of a sprint, which of these endings that you're heading towards, and at the end of a sprint, which of these categories you can place your sprint within. What this then does is allows you to apply corrective actions, try new ideas, encourage experimentation to navigate your teams away from the negative categories along the right, so bittersweet and bitter endings, and move them more towards the left and hopefully the upper left. By you having a clear understanding of where you're heading or where you're finishing more often than not, you can then start to build in those steps to navigate to different categories and different sort of endings for your stories and sprints. So in terms of creating sweet endings, or the sort of ideas I would encourage you to take away if you want to create more sweet endings, bear in mind that how did we get here step of each ending and navigate accordingly. Raise transparency on needs, especially when they're hidden or opaque from the team. There's nothing worse than you being able to see an opportunity to capture more value or to capture an improvement that the team can't. And as a primary concern in a Scrum Master role, that raising of transparency should be your first order of business. Understand the trade-offs between needs and wants, and most importantly of all, make these explicit. You may see habits forming within the team where we're consistently trading off our needs for what we want, or vice versa. If you've noticed that, don't be scared to voice that within the context of a retrospective. Ask your team, is there a reason that we tend to default to this kind of decision making? And just make that more explicit and transparent within the team. Allow them to walk you through their inner thinking, and then you can analyze if there's a better decision making process or mechanism that you can look to embed. And the final idea on the framework at large is it's really handy to make this a bit of a metric for you, even if this is just an internal sort of notepad style metric of how your team's performing. We can take each of these endings and over the course of half a dozen sprints, say, categorize each of our sprints depending on where we land, and we'll get something that looks like this. And for this team, clearly something's going right. We've got more sweet endings than anything else. We haven't had any bitter endings yet. And this, for me, looks like the metrics or the numbers of a really high-performing team, a team who is getting sweet endings more often than not, and judiciously able to use those semi-sweet and bittersweet endings to either drive development forward, experiment in safe-to-fail ways, and avoid the bitter endings more than anything. So having this as a bit of an internal guide or a metric is really helpful. I'll now rattle through a few of the cinema bits that I talked about. So the sort of core framework, I hope you've understood, but there's a lot more ways to apply cinema and cinema theory in your retrospectives and your teams. One thing I'm really big on is themed retrospectives, and cinema, movies, stories like these give you really great subject matter to use in your retrospectives. The QR code on the screen will take you to my link tree. There's tons and tons and tons of movie themed retrospectives that you can try. And these really drive out a lot of engagement in your teams. These should be really helpful if you're looking to keep things fresh and dial some engagement back into your retrospective sessions. Next one is a strategy that I sort of call roles in a retrospective. So this is really helpful for bringing out a high level of candor and transparency in your sessions. So let's imagine that we want to run a retrospective session and we'll give it a Game of Thrones theme. What I can also do is assign roles from that Game of Thrones story to members of the team. So if we were going to run one in this session, for example, I could say, Jamie, you're going to be Daenerys, I'll be Tyrion, and someone else could be Tywin, someone else could be Jon Snow. And what I've done by doing that is I've given the team a really handy piece of psychological armor to wear in this session now. The teams can now approach these sessions with more honesty, more candor, and in some cases, more sharp and brutal questioning, because they don't feel as though they're asking these questions from their personal point of view. I'm asking them to play a role, and if they're going to play that role effectively, there might be occasions where they need to ask really sharp and pointed questions. There might be occasions where they need to be incredibly creative. There might be situations where they need to show some vulnerability. These sort of psychological armor mechanisms are really helpful. And if you haven't tried this before in one of your retrospective sessions, I would really encourage you to give it a try, especially if you've got a theme that the team are bought in on. Couple more ideas. Telling great stories, I think, is a really handy bolt-on to have to your Scrum Master and Agile coaching skill set. There's a lot of different ways to tell great stories, but just familiarizing yourself with typical cinema plot lines or patterns is really helpful. The hero's journey, the 3 acts, Save the Cat, the Fishtian Curve, Freytig's Pyramid. You've probably heard of 2 or 3 of these, and there might be 2 or 3 in there that you haven't heard of. But these storytelling mechanisms and patterns are really helpful for you to develop your communication skills, your storytelling skills, and your facilitation skills. So this is well worth the investment, and then well worth trying to apply in a session like a retrospective. So we could have a 3 acts where we've got a start, a middle, and end. We could have a hero's journey. We could have a Save the Cat style pattern in that retrospective. These are really helpful for you as a retrospective facilitator to get to the results you want to get to, but also to add more strings to your bow as a facilitator. Okay, and we're right at the end now. So a few things I want to sort of press on, or a few callbacks I want to call out as the final takeaways. The 4 endings we've talked about map really nicely to your retrospective sprints and iterations. Use it as a tool to assess effectiveness and try and steer your sessions or your sprints accordingly, depending on either where you have landed or where it looks like you're going to land. You can use this to embed a new metric. Again, as I touched on, it doesn't need to be something that you put onto an information radiator or something that you put onto an ADO board. You can even just use this internally for yourself in your notepad, and it's really good material for you to understand where you're going and how you can get to better places. And then don't be scared to look beyond the 4 endings. The 4 endings, one idea for how you can apply cinematic theory into your role, but there's tons of others, like those themed retrospective, the roles in a retro, the storytelling strategies. Those are all really helpful. The final thing, if there's one thing you take away more than anything else, I hope it's this image on the right. This is what we should be driving at as Scrum and Agile professionals delivering retrospectives. We want as many sweet endings as we can get. We want to use semi-sweet and bittersweet endings intelligently, and we want to minimize the bitter endings as much as we can. Okay, and I've talked you all to death now. I'm sure some of you were asleep, but that is it. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's been interesting, but most of all, I hope it's something that you can take away and apply. As I touched on, this is a bit of a new talk for me. I'm still sort of playing around with it and trying to refine it. So if you can take some time to leave me some feedback, I would absolutely love that. And yeah, if there's anything I can answer now, please fire away with any questions, queries, comments, criticisms. I'm happy to take it all, but I hope that was helpful, guys.
Super
Dave.
helpful.
Yeah, really great. Do we have some questions, Katina?
Not a question, just appreciation. I loved it. I loved it, Chris. What you left with the 4 quadrants, and I think the wants versus the needs, and being really cognizant of that with your teams, especially a lot of those hidden needs. That's so powerful. Like really, really so powerful. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice way to sort of capture and formalize what we do as Scrum and Agile people. We are all about finding what those hidden needs, those hidden unmet needs are, and bringing those out into the open. So I hope it's really helpful in that regard.
Yeah. We have a question from Mike in the chat. He asks, could the theory here be applied in different contexts? For example, I ran a team character building session today. If you were to think about wants and needs from the team, could that help drive the right outcome to support the team charter?
I would definitely say so. I don't think that this is an exclusive mechanism to sprint retrospectives in and of themselves. And I'm also currently applying this with sprints in and of themselves. So not just the retrospective looking at it. Because I'm sort of making a distinction here between a leading and a lagging indicator. By the time we're at the retrospective, this analysis is going to give me a lagging indicator of where we're going. But if I can do this in the lifespan of a sprint, it gives me more of a leading indicator. So there's a nice sort of trade-off I can make there as well. But it's absolutely not exclusive to retrospectives. It could be applied anywhere where you can see the need, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. And one other question also from Mike. He asks, how would you recommend identifying wants and needs for the team?
So your wants should be fairly straightforward. If I bring, I'll cycle back. So the wants are typically fairly straightforward because you can get this from things like your statements of works, your sprint goals, the really sort of clear and obvious stuff. These wants are going to be things that are external, they'll be known, they'll be unique to the team. These are the things that are going to drive your project forward. So if this project's going to be a success, we need to tick these boxes, otherwise leadership's going to go through the roof. Your needs are the key ones. These are the ones that you need to play by ear. And this will depend on the team you've got in front of you. If I've got a brand new team coming together that hasn't worked together before, I should expect to have different challenges on the table than a team that's been together for 5 years, knows each other really well, and they've got a specific way of doing things. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question, I guess?
It does. Are you saying though with a new team that it takes time to kind of like in a way understand it without necessarily directly asking? Is that kind of
No, not necessarily. So I think what you'll find is there'll be different needs. So in a new team, for example, I might have developers jockeying for position because one wants to be the senior and another one thinks he's the better man for the job, and I'll need to sort of navigate that challenge. If I'm part of a long-lived team that's been together 5 to 10 years, I'm not going to expect that type of challenge. I'm going to expect other things like a lack of adaptability or resistance to change. So there's different challenges depending on the context the team sits within. Is this making sense?
yeah, I think so.
That sounds like a no, yes.
No, yes. So yeah.
Hey Dave, is it okay if I just piggyback on this question, wants versus needs?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so would it be reasonable to say that the wants are some things that can maybe support your current comfort zone, that can fall under your default requirements? However, needs are something that will make us better or help us to improve. Um, so,
I think I can sort of see what you're getting at. I think if you ever need to make a trade-off decision on these two, 9 times out of 10 as an agilist or a scrum person, you're going to want you'll be very tempted to prioritize the needs over the wants.
mhm.
However, one thing I'm sure I've pissed some of you people off on the call with recently is I'm harping on at the minute around scrum masters are delivery people as well. So we can't always be sacrificing the wants in service of the needs. So you're right. Typically, the needs will be the more important things where you can add more value and you can drive more growth in your team. But if you find that you're consistently hitting the needs and consistently not hitting the wants, that's equally a problem. Does that make sense, Saruki?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I got your point. I mean, I was not even thinking only about agile or from agile standpoint. For example, say food, water, shelter. These are our needs.
Yep.
And if we want, for example, I want smartphone. I want to go on vacation. Um, I want to say dine at expensive restaurants. These are wants.
Yeah, yeah, and these are the type of things that you'll typically see. Like if I go back to the example I started with at the start, the reason that Joker's a really good a really good film and a really good story is there's a very clear need that he has that is going to make his life better, and he sacrifices that to get something less valuable. He wants fame and to be a successful stand-up comedian,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he sacrifices his mental health to get that. So you're absolutely on the right track there. I hope that's helpful. I hope that's answered the question. Oh, you've come back on. Thank you very much. Okay. I don't know if we've got any other questions. Katiana, Jamie, I don't know, or if people have had enough of my dulcet tones now, maybe.
There's no more questions in the chat.
And I asked
I
if you haven't
would,
seen the chat,
I would have one.
leave one word.
May
Leave one word in the chat about how you're feeling today as you leave, or how you feel about the presentation. So Peter, maybe you type fun. Maybe you could type fun in the chat. So leave a one word response in the chat. How are you feeling today? What are you thinking about? I see enabling, popcorn, intrigued, informative, innovative, cinematic, more intrigued, yes.
We know that's a lie. There's no 10 out of 10s on IMDb.
That means you're even better. I see some inspired here, yes. Wondering, inspired, insightful. Good feedback, Dave. Thank you so much. Yes, thanks for leaving the words in the chat. I appreciate that, everyone.
Incredibly kind. I'm sure a lot of you'll stick the knife in as soon as my back's turned, but thanks for being nice to me first.
No, Dave. Not this community. These guys are the real thing.
Yeah.
And
No, that's really kind.
Jamie,
Thanks, everyone.
Jamie, I think I have one thing to share that Dave did not share with you. It's a kind of surprise for you. Dave plans to share the electronic version of tickets of flight risk to everyone.
I plan to share what? What does this mean?
It's a new movie here in USA, Flight Risk.
Oh.
So on the success of your meetup, you just committed me, right? That you are planning to share that electronic version of tickets to everyone. So everyone is happy.
Oh my, now he's a pirate.
Well, I haven't heard of that one, but I watched that 0 Day recently with
Oh yeah.
De Niro, and tremendous. Well worth a watch. Yeah, definitely check that one out.
I agree. That's a great series. You can binge watch it. It's great.
Yeah, it's really good, tremendous material. And I'd be interested if you can tell us what the ending is. There's 6 episodes, and at the end, and he's in a very clear category. I wonder if anyone could tell us which one that was.
Oh.
Are you going to hazard a guess?
That if not, that's your homework. Come back and reach out to Dave. Oh, Sarita.
Hi, Dave. This is Sarita.
Hi.
I have one question about your links, which has shared in chat box. So I was going through the retrospective links are there, but I'm getting permission only for the viewer. Even though I copy and paste it on my own board, I got the same like viewer only, not edit. So is there any?
You're absolutely right. I can't open it up to edit, otherwise everyone changes them. But if you look on at the top of the list here, there should be how to use. There's a board on there that'll show you how to get them into your own instances.
Yeah, I did that. Like I went through how to use it, and there I saw Control A and Control C P. I did that, but again when I'm opening it from in my board, it's showing me only viewer. So that's why.
Okay, maybe that's something we can cover offline, or maybe we can cover that later. If you send me a message, I'll have a look at it for you.
Yeah, sure. I will get back to you on LinkedIn. Thank you, Dave.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave, again. Thank you, Katiana, for tech hosting today. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you again at a future event. We've got some good ones coming up and some more on the back burner that I'm getting ready to post. So keep an eye on that. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you today. Have a great
Thanks a lot, everyone.
day. Have a great rest
Thanks
of
all.
your week. Thanks again, Dave.